This is Bernard Alsop family. I've lived in the village, Napton on the Hill, since 1945. Born here at that time in the Napton nursing home. The family have been here from at least 1630. Alsops and Watsons were involved in the land enclosure when common land was turned into fields, approximately 1798. Grandad Arthur Smith Alsop was the first clerk to the parish council, and his grave is in Napton Lower Churchyard. This Napton Walk is dedicated to Leslie and Fred Lowther of Vancouver, and it's mainly covered by 76 years living in the village. Information on the adjoining settlements of Hillside and Chapel Green may follow later. At the moment we're on the one road in the village not named, regardless of what Google tell you, and we're passing the indents in the field on the right hand side, which were known to be plague pits. When the sewer was put through in the 50s, loads of bones appeared, but were quickly thrown back in the trenches. We're moving up towards Howcombe Lane, where you see the Christadelphian meeting room. Prior to that, there was a thatched blacksmith's shop there. Regrettably, sparks caught the roof and it burnt to the ground. Now on New Street, heading towards the wonderful village shop. Just passing some of the last stone-built houses in the village.
Yes, me, Gabriel.
And a bungalow where previously two stone-built cottages stood. Past the village shop that was in the early 1900s owned by the family that I've just forgotten. The son was killed in the First World War. Moving past Home Farm, where it has been said the king kept his horses and hounds when he came out this way from Kenilworth Castle to hunt. We now cross the road, heading for the main green. To our left we have the Midland Bank, as was. I can remember coming there with Dad. Behind that was the village reading room, when way back newspapers and documents would be left for the general public to come and read. And I'm told the instruments for the village band were kept there. Byfield House, I believe, was the first school in the village, because it was a private school and you paid fees to the family, the Matthews family I believe, to send your children to school. Across the green you can see the white painted building, which at one time, before I can remember, but was the Sunshine Home, where they it was a children's home looking after orphan children, I believe. The village green used to have a fete and a fair twice a year. Immediately in front we're coming up to the old plough and harrow, where I was going to say I learnt to drink, but I never really learnt to drink. They called me Half Pint. A lovely old pub with low ceilings and lots of atmosphere, but the same people bought the Crown as well and closed this one. Behind the pub at one time was Mr. Griffin, a coal merchant, and part of that family also ran a fun fair, and that was their winter quarters. At the side of the green we have a row of memorial trees, this being for Thomas Griffin. Looking back at Paddock Close is the site of where the local co-op stood, and grandfather Arthur Smith Alsop was one of the founder members of the Napton Cooperative Society. It was later taken over by the Rugby Co-op. They had a butcher, they had a coal delivery section, and they had a bakery there. This has very much changed, the building in front being the, as I remember it, Mrs. Seaton's shop, which was a general foodstuffs and the only newsagent in the village at the time. And there was a long, deep window on the left where boxes of sweets were laid out on show, usually with their cat laying on top of them. The cat was moved to get you a quart of lemon sherbets or whatever it was you wanted.
Why would you paint a building on a building?
We're now moving to Crown Green. And this was the public house when the Plough and Harrow closed, and this has only closed in the last few years. It was the Crown Inn. And where we're standing now, Joseph Arch stood to give a talk to the farm workers when he was forming the Farm Workers Union. Joseph Arch, as you may well remember, lived in Barford. There's a pub there named after him. If you Google his name, you'll find out all the information about him. Born in Warwickshire, but later on became an MP in Norfolk. Yes, that look at the dragon on the thatch. That was done quite recently, and that was the old bakery.
Oh, it says the old bakery.
The little house on the side was Mrs. Neal's shop. Again, just general provisions.
You used to have a lot of shops here.
And if you went up the alleyway, we'd race up there from school on I forget which day of the week, and Mr. whatever his name was, the baker, would hand out free little bread rolls. He must have always used a bit of dough to make some bread rolls he'd give to the kids.
Oh.
Across the road, varied between a butcher's shop and general store, and that was converted to houses as it is now. Moving forward, there were some stone cottages which was along the side of the footpath leading up to the school, which was the boys' school. It's changed somewhat.
Oh, it has, hasn't it? Then and now.
So it's called School Bank at the time. That was another view of the same cottages. changes from being school walk to South View. And leading up in front of them where the car's parked now was the village pound, where if stray animals were found in the village they were impounded and you had to pay to get them released from the pound, but some local developer saw fit to build over it and the footpath closed despite our efforts, or mother's efforts, to keep it open.
What's that building? Was that an old cinema or something?
That's a chapel, but later became the Nickelodeon, and where they had a theatre organ that rose up out the ground and with the man playing it. And that was all transferred to the other side of Warwick at some stage, Ashbourne I think. I can just remember that being a chapel, one of the three in the village. Outside the Crown pub, once a year, was Wool Day, and all the local farmers brought their bags of wool. The fleeces were put into large Hessian bags, held together by wooden pegs, and they were brought here, and the buyers for the wool sat outside the Crown, weighed and graded the wool, paid for it, and bought each farmer a drink, and the bales of wool were then loaded onto lorries, taken down to Napton station to be shipped off to Bradford and the likes, where they were used for clothing.
Where's Napton station from here?
Napton station is approximately 3 miles away, nearer to Stockton. So actually Napton and Stockton station. And I just remember that being open, and I went there to collect day-old chicks along with my father. But can't remember when it closed.
How long was the station open for? Like, how many years?
I don't know when the line went through, but I'm even trying to think where it went to. It would have been there for well, not the start of the railways, but when railways were in their height, whenever that might have been, and then closed in the 50s, early 60s. And, well, the Beeching cuts, of course, which cut out many railways, didn't it? Just another thought, looking back down at the Crown and the alleyway up the side that led to the bakery, behind there was a house that belonged to the Oddfellows, the Manchester Unity of Oddfellows. There was a local branch, the Royal, no, get it right, the Shuckburgh Park Lodge, who met at the Crown, and we have a map showing that house belongs to the Oddfellows, and found recently that there was a family, Fells, who ran into hard times, and they were put into that house by the Oddfellows, and the family stayed there for many years.
Yeah, also forgetting the more recent history of the Crown, in which Singe created a legacy.
Yes, since the
Big combo.
the local boys band played there many years ago. Yeah, they're best known for the smell of the toilets when you open the front door. Moving on. Shall we go that way? We're now going up the bricks. Notice that because this was a brick footpath, later tarmacked because it was so slippy. To my left is a footpath which has gradually got blocked by local residents as they're applying to move it to a different location. I used to walk that home from school many times. We're crossing Chapel Lane, moving up towards the village war memorial. The plaque to the left gives the story of this memorial being placed here. The centrepiece being removed from the old school when it was sold. The first person on there being Wilfred Alsop, a long lost relative whose grave I have visited, top side of the Somme. Private Percy H. Justice is the son of the shop owner who lived there in the early 1900s.
What was entailed in moving the memorial from the school?
The main centrepiece was actually built into the wall of the school, and it was paid for by the local population and placed there before the formation of the British Legion, who tried to get involved when we decided to rescue it. The vicar was more concerned at the time that would we do any damage to the building and perhaps lower the value of it as the church was selling it. We were more concerned with saving the memorial. It went into storage for a year or two before we found the site. This land having been registered to the parish council. Prior to that, on this site, which is on such a slope, it's hard to believe, was the Sunday school to the Baptist chapel, and that was cleared before we started work to replace it. 4 of us villagers became the War Memorial Working Party and set to build this wing-shaped formation. The chapel to the left of us is often called the Methodist chapel, but if you look at the plaque below the window in the gable end, it's a Baptist chapel built by great Uncle John for his wife, who was a Baptist. And I'm told that there was much talk in the time when they were married. They went by pony and trap for a honeymoon in the Derbyshire Dales.
Oh, hello. Hey, beautiful.
Is this where you hold the memorial services as well?
Yes, that's, it tells you on there when that was rededicated, I believe. Rededicated in November 2008, and the 4 of us who arranged that service thought we'd done our duty. And the following year, about a month before Remembrance Day, the vicar asked, had we got the service organised? And we've been organising the service every year since, and we had about 170 people turn out this year, and 15 wreaths laid by various associations and people in the village. So excellent turnout. We then retired to the club for tea and biscuits, and when the bar opened, some were reluctant to leave. You can see the brick gutter at the side, and that's the type of brick that was all across these paths. I'm told how slippy it used to get in the winter. Quite a climb to the church. Looking across the lower churchyard, you can see the one war grave. Now we have the gravestone of Arthur Smith Alsop, died in 1920. My grandfather, the first parish council clerk in approximately 1898, when parish council were first formed. Prior to that, he was the assistant village surveyor. Don't ask me what that entailed.
He died a long time before you were born then?
Yes, I never knew my grandfather, never knew my grandmother on the other side. Grandad Barrett was the church warden, or one of the church wardens for many, many years. In his latter years he was laid in bed riddled with arthritis and couldn't get out of bed even. He was looked after for many years in that position, poor soul. Although we had the main memorial on the school, war memorial, in latter years another memorial was erected in the cemetery or lower churchyard. Moving towards the main churchyard. In there is Uncle Mushing's grave, and I've cleaned it off a couple of times. But I think the grass cuttings get tipped over the bank, and they've covered his.
Uncle Mushing.
Uncle Mushing was married to Grandad's sister. Grandad played the cello with the quartet that used to play on the balcony in the church, which is long removed, and they then replaced the quartet by installing the organ.
Half a landmine up there.
That was found by Tim Griffin's father up the field at Home Farm, where Chris Gate now lives. When I was in the choir, we'd open the centre door and just look out, see which members were in that were sidesmen, to hand them the collecting bag.
They just kept the door.
That's probably one of the oldest bits. We hoped it would go back on, but when they were refurbing the vestry, it was taken off. And I was afraid it was going to be thrown away, but young John Eden actually came and fixed it to the wall, so it's kept in the building. Way back when people had meetings, they were called vestry meetings in the main, because the only place, sort of public place to meet, was the vestry. And the Townlands charity in the village that started in 1600 had vestry meetings, and later on they met in the boys' school, and they still classified them as vestry meetings. Later reverted to people's homes. I've got some booklets so you can read up on the church later. Alfred Payne, I believe, was the headmaster prior to Frank Hyde, who was there in my time. Lived at the Rosary at the side of the green. And he was headmaster during the war when we had evacuees out from Coventry. And the evacuees went to school, I believe, in the mornings, and the local children in the afternoon. There's that many of them, they split the classes. There's the grave of my mother, Winnie, and the ashes of my father, Thomas Francis, known as Frank. He was killed when the Warwickshire hunt passed over his land without permission. Over there is Dennis's parents. Harold William Eden is young John's granddad. Across here is Uncle Ray, mother's brother.
Author.
Ray Barrett. Yes, who wrote a lovely book, Besants and Parsons. And his son said he lived up to his name, knew it, because he knew everything. As we come out the back of the church onto the road leading to the windmill, there used to be a second windmill across to our right somewhere, which is a wooden structure. And we have a map showing that, so that's a fact. What might not be a fact, as Dad told me, they took the one down because there wasn't enough wind for both of them. A quick point on Napton in general. Napton's in the Domesday Book of 1086, and the village was recorded as Napton. In the 14th century, the village was granted a market charter by King Edward II, and the village had a market and a fair granted. The population then was very similar to the population today of 1,000. An unusual feature of the village is that the population roughly stayed around 1,000 throughout the years. And I was
1,000 now then?
It was 1,000 a few years ago. We've had quite a few houses built now, so we could be up to 1,500. And I was just checking about the Enclosures Act. The land was enclosed in 1779, previously being common land. And both the Alsops and the Watsons, two local families, were involved in that. And I forget what their titles were, but they were not trustees, but anyway, involved in the Land Enclosure Act. There were a few fields around the village that were called closes, like Howcombe Close, Treadless Close, which were enclosures prior to other land being enclosed, where cattle were brought in or stock off the common to be enclosed at night, so they were safe from wolves and whatever other beasts were about at the time. Yeah, and there's the thing. In the census of 1851, there was a thriving village able to support 2 bakers, 2 blacksmiths, 17 farmers, 20 graziers, 4 grocers, 4 shopkeepers and 5 shoemakers. Also included in the village at the time were 5 inns and taverns.
5 shoemakers?
Regrettably, this land here is thought of as common land, but it certainly isn't that. It's land without a fence around it, which stems back from the days when it was a gated road, and there was a gate on the bottom of the road near the school, and there would have been a gate along the other side. We're now moving up the road towards the Windmill, top of Napton Hill, and approaching the site of the observer post. Around 1965 there was talk of the windmill being demolished to allow the clay works to continue. Recently I've read reports of something of an uprising against that, and as you can see the windmill stayed, but the clay works closed eventually.
Do you have any memory of them trying to knock it down?
I read about it recently in the WI 1965 yearbook, where they'd kept the snippets about it. My Auntie Mary, father's elder sister, could remember coming to the mill with her father to get corn milled, but father couldn't remember that. So that would have been turn of the century, I suppose. And all that is left of where the observer post was is this little memorial site. tree was planted by the Crick family just to retain the memory. And then the Warwickshire Working Party took on the task of maintaining things here and putting a plaque there to give some history. Apparently used quite a lot of people walkers stopping for picnic and so on.
So what? Tell us more about what was here then.
Here was a brick built building with an open top, and on the top was a planning. There was a wheel really where they took directions on this wheel of where planes were coming from and which way they were heading. And then they had to ring ahead, and the observers that were there to pass on the information. Mainly I suspect of German planes heading for Coventry. That isn't the building, the actual building, but it's very similar. And the top was open, and obviously sat up there with binoculars and recording what was coming where. And there's a wind-up telephone where you'd have to wind around and ring ahead and report what you're seeing.
So where's Coventry from here then?
So looking directly in front, if it wasn't a misty day, you'd see Coventry. One of the Warwickshire Working Party could remember his parents bringing him up here, and they watched with loads of other people. They watched Coventry burning during the Blitz, and it was just a big glow right across the horizon in front of us. And so it was such a fire that it could be seen from here. And we're 18 miles from Coventry? Perhaps a bit closer to crow flies. And then somewhere in front of us, marked by that sheep, an underground bunker was built, and that was mainly for the to check on nuclear reactions. Trying to think of the wording, but if there's a nuclear explosion, they were there to collect the information and pass that on.
Sounds like a Cold War.
So that was for the Cold War, and when the Cuban crisis came up, and 2 people were taken out of work and brought here and locked down, and I believe they were there for 2 days before the crisis was over, and they were able to come out, and that's somewhere.
Watching to see if anything was coming,
They had to monitor the air
in case the Russians.
for whether there was any contamination. So had the.
But from an underground bunker.
Yeah, well, they've got vents on the top and equipment in the bottom. So I'm being a bit vague, but any radioactive fallout is what they were trying to monitor, I suppose.
And what happened to that bunker?
It's still there. The tops were knocked off. There's stories of it just being filled over. There's stories of it being filled with ready mix. It's quite interesting to
Is it in this field?
have a scrape one day. Oh yeah, when it's really hot weather, you can sort of see the outline of it. We won't go to the brickworks, which is, if you just drop off the other side of the windmill, there's quite a big drop, and there's a footpath down the side of it. But there was quite a thriving brickworks back in the day, which I can remember a friend working down there. Actually, we've just passed his grave. The lad from the Lock Cottage, and I think he was getting £7 a week driving a dumper truck, and I was getting about £4 a week using a motorcycle to get into rugby when I was doing my apprenticeship. I thought he was on a better job than me, but perhaps it worked out differently in the end. The other point, looking from here, you can't, because the weather can't quite see the canal, but the canal was part of a stop line. There were 3 stop lines up the country during the war, Second World War, and should we be invaded, there were 3 attempts to stop the Germans coming up the country, and rivers and canals and different things were used to get a line across the country, and the canal through Napton was part of that line. And if you walk to the left when you get to the Folly pub, and I think you go to Bridge 13, which I believe is the only privately owned bridge on the canal, and just beyond it on the left hand side is a concrete bunker which would have been manned, and by the canal bridge on the right hand side is a great big concrete structure that was supposed to be rolled onto the bridge to stop tanks or the likes coming over it. And there was one of those by every bridge, as I can remember as a child. What good they would have done come the day, I dread to think. And there's some indication that we first had a windmill in the village in 1543, but it would have been a tower mill, perhaps the previously wooden mill I was talking about. And then the canal came through in roughly 1774. These concrete pillars were actually part of where the lookout tower was, and that was the gateway into it, so the area that surrounded it.
That cobra came out and sort of started to get into the bone now.
We're now walking down the hollow way, as it is known or was known. And the main road to the windmill was the one we travelled previously. It's been a later addition. Heading towards the allotments, and there were hundreds of allotments in the village at one time. In fact, the land on the left going up to the windmill was all allotments. Another reason for perhaps the land behind the church not being fenced in, they were all allotments. And as you come up Butt Hill into the village, the field on the left hand side was all allotments in my time, and people just obviously grew all their own produce. The village had a windfall when a group of us who were on the parish council at the time got part of the redundant allotments put into the structure plan, and it was taken up and planning permission was gained, and the village received, I think, £600,001 for that part that's been built on. That allowed the village to then spend money on refurbishing the village hall, to provide a wonderful new sports facility in the village, because we'd also given away our sports facility at the time to build a new school on, because the church said they could afford to build a school but they couldn't afford to buy the land to put it on, so the parish gave them the land, which rather cornered them. It wasn't what they were expecting, I don't think. We got the school, which does a lot for the village because it keeps the village young. School in the village makes a big impact, helps support the village shop and everything else that goes on. The school headmaster is very, very good at supporting the Remembrance Day service or anything to do with remembrance. To the side of the allotments are some sheds there that have been left to ruin, which is a shame, but there were a couple of stables there, and at the side of those is a manhole top, and I've lifted that, and down below is brickwork, probably 2'6" diameter, which leads up under the bank behind those houses. And you wonder how that was built and when it was built. Water running all the time, which then comes on across through the allotments, and some of it runs out the other side and is still running now and runs down the side of Howcombe Close Field, across the road further down Howcombe Lane, then crosses Pillory Green, and it actually then comes out into a drain at the side of the village shop and post office, and that water's flowing all the time. And that was one of the problems when they built there, was the water that was around, and still is. So there was a Napton water supply way before it was piped in from Rugby, and there were tap positions around the village that there were then outside taps, people not having water piped into their houses. When the land was sold off for building, a right of way was kept through the fence, and the right to connect to the sewer and other services should the parish council ever wish to sell this land. And prior to this being allotments, which runs back to where the new houses are, it was a stone pit for the use of the village surveyor, and stone was to make up the roads and footpaths throughout the village. So Grandad, as assistant village surveyor, would have perhaps known more about that. And this, we have records somewhere of later on of stone for making up footpaths and roads being imported from Hartshill Quarry in Nuneaton and arriving by barge 2 days later, having to be shovelled out down at the wharf, which is near where the Folly pub is now. There's a massive water tank under the Help Yourself stand, which is part of the old Napton water supply. And one of the village pumps used to stand here. We used to run down from school and pump the handle and spread water running down the road. And there's a date on a namestone behind there, but I don't know whether it can be read.
So when was the pump removed?
I can remember it in my youth, probably till I was 10 or 12, so I don't know, 55-ish. There was a much bigger triangle of land here at one time, but the highways in their wisdom gave permission for that drive, which they then said this junction was too close to that drive, so this junction had to be moved. So they pushed this road across. We had several grass islands. There were one at the bottom of Howcombe Lane, there was one at the start of Folly Lane, and they've got demolished over the years. I think now Jamie is showing the last remaining item from the Second World War, being a Nissen hut at the top of Howcombe Lane. And the house is built on the site of the Nissen hut where the soldiers lived when they were sent out here during the war, and that was later occupied by the Alsop family, who couldn't find anywhere else to live in the village at the time.
How long the Allsop family living there?
18 years.
This is your
I
parents,
moved
or
you in there when I
were
was
living there?
I was 1 when I moved into there.
In that actual one? Or?
You know, down below. It's a different. There's a similar shape at the one end, which is the bedrooms and the top room, and then below was a kitchen and great big cast iron stove, and that was a much squarer structure, clad in asbestos, and the bedrooms were lined with asbestos, asbestos sheets. The building that was there was just called Howcombe Close, which it was named after the field. And when I was at school, I had a bit of an argument with the teacher who said, well, what number Howcombe Close is it? I said, no, it's just Howcombe Close. He said, it can't be. You have a group of houses in the close. So my knowledgeable teacher obviously didn't know what a close was in the first place. It was originally an enclosure of land for the animals to come into, later used for housing estates.
Get in trouble then?
Don't know. Fell out with him. It's a pity we can't see over this hedge, but recently younger brother Ollie, who lives in Wigan, found a picture on eBay showing a hovel just over the hedge, which I never saw but heard about, and apparently when he was much younger, Dad, in his younger days, Dad milked a cow in there, but it had fallen down. I'm told the pillory was actually in the grass island that stood at the bottom of this road, Howcombe Lane, and when they dug the grass island out, they dug out the stumps of what would have been the stocks.
So they used to put people in the stocks?
Where people would have been pilloried, they'd have been shut in the stocks, and then you throw stones or rotten fruit or manure or whatever else you might like to throw at them, or they're just left in there as a punishment for a certain amount of time. And then beyond the footpath was the ducking well. And somewhere across here was a if you should dig around, get hold of that iron ring and pull that lump of concrete up. There's, I think, a 9-inch drain, and that'll be running quite fast, and that's the water running from the old allotments and the old Napton water system and heading off down to the side of the shop. And somewhere in this position was the old ducking well. At one stage you could just see the edge of the brickwork on this driveway.
So what time period was the ducking well here then? When did that go?
That, I should think, went in the 60s. Probably, I can remember it as a...
60s?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't use it in the 60s.
No, it was just enclosed. I knew it, enclosed in as a well.
Right.
And there's an old gentleman who used to live the other side of the hill. He used to bring his horse over and take his cart out of a shed here where he kept a cart, a four-wheel wagon, and the cart, and he'd step down into the well and fill up milk churns, which he then took right up to the top of the hill where the cricks are farming now, to water his cattle, because there was no mains water up there.
So why did they fill it up?
And it was said to be dangerous, that people might fall in it. Just wanted a good fence around it, really. And apparently I used to tag along behind him when he went up the road, so if I'd gone missing when they couldn't find me, I was following Mr. Duckett, was it up to Sheesby, Mr. Sheesby. I was following up to his fields, and then I remember him coming back down with a four-wheeled cart, and somebody I'd never seen before. He'd stop at the top of the hill, up near where we've been by the windmill, and take these wooden chocks, which were hooked on the side of the cart, push them under the wheels, under the back wheels, and then drag the cart down, so it was to slow the cart down so the cart wasn't pushing the horse, but it could run away and tip the horse over. So you had chocks under the wheels. And when that building was there, and it's a pity it was taken down, an old corrugated iron building, but in the back of it were notes of how many carts had been hired and for how many days. And apparently people used to come around to mend the roads, and they'd come with their own horses, but they'd hire the carts, and they'd go down to the wharf at the Folly and load up their stone, and which had come by canal, and mend the roads and footpaths. But another bit of history gone. The lovely thatched cottage opposite, we applied I think about 4 times to try and get planning permission there for my brother. Eventually gained it, and it was named the best looking house in the village. Some people accused us of probably stealing the land. It might have been fenced in for growing potatoes during the war, and then the Alsops had kept the land. But brother actually spent a couple of days in his loft going through some old paperwork and found a receipt when Grandad had bought the land for 12 and sixpence in 18 daddy-da, whatever it was. And so evidence that the land belonged. In fact, the land there used to be 2 bits of garden, which people rented for 2 and 6 a year. And I remember they used to come down at Christmas and give Dad the 2 and sixpence rent. Towards the end of our tour, I'd like to thank the film crew, Jamie Alsop and Laura Howkins, doing Laura on the sound. Thank you all very much. We'll retire for lunch.